Here we go. So now I'll start sharing my screen. So welcome again, everyone. I am absolutely pleased to be here this evening with you and of course with my friend Tui De Roy. So my name is Kelsey. I am both with C&H Tours and Galapagos Travel. Most of you are probably with us either because you know of Galapagos Travel or of course you know Tui. So what I want to give you is just first a little bit of a background on myself and why it's both C&H Tours and Galapagos Travel. So first myself, I was lucky enough to live and work in Galapagos for several years. It was about 8 years in total. I worked at the Charles Darwin Research Station and primarily worked in fundraising, but of course, fundraising is really many different elements of the station itself. I'm not a scientist by training, but certainly by interest. And when I had a bit of vacation days that I wasn't spending back home in Canada, I was lucky enough to do some field work and at one point doing field work with Tui. And so some of my happiest memories from Galapagos are on this very remote volcano, kind of in the middle of nowhere, sleeping in a wonderful little cabin infested with rats. I didn't care. It was really a dream trip. And like I said, I got to do that with Twee, along with a
Well,
scientist and the park ranger. So yeah, that's how we really got to know each other well. But beyond that, I am from Canada. And so when I moved back here, I joined C&H Tours, which is a very small company run and owned by two people that also lived and worked in Galapagos in the 90s, Mark Patry and Heather Blankiron. They brought me on, and since then we've not only grown, but we also were lucky enough to have Galapagos Travel as now our sister agency. And so we're kind of put together as one, yet two separate entities still. We're still working on merging. But what we did want to do is keep the spirit of Galapagos Travel and some of its tours because we know how popular they are, that being primarily the photography tour. So hence why we're very lucky to now be working directly with TWE on these. And that's what we'll be talking about tonight are these special tours that we're now running throughout well, one in 2025, some throughout 2026, and hopefully many in the future. But without further ado, I will now share the floor, as it were, with Twee. I'd first like to share this little photo I have here. It's there's a bit of delay here. One of my favorites. I didn't have time to go through scrolling through my many photos from that trip, but this is Twee off in the background. This was most likely very early morning with the steam coming off the fumaroles around Alcedo. And as you can see, some friendly giant tortoises there as well. So without further ado, I'll hand it over to Twee and let her introduce herself and her background and her partnership with us too.
well, where do I start? Okay, I'll start with the beginning. My parents were from Belgium. I was born in Brussels, and when I was less than 2 years old, they decided to come and live in the Galapagos Islands and become pioneers, because in those days, that's the only thing you could do here. And so we arrived here on the day of my second birthday, and what a birthday present that was, because everything that's happened since then has been just, well, not a fairy tale. There were plenty of hard times, but it was a journey of discovery that started in Galapagos, led me around the islands, made me fall in love with nature, and then spread out to the rest of the world. And I started photographing with my dad's little camera. Then I got my own camera when I was 16, and I had my first feature article in Audubon magazine when I was 19. And basically, all I've ever done my whole life is take pictures and write about nature, about Galapagos and many other parts of the world as well. I've traveled to all 7 continents, but I always gravitate back to Galapagos. I lived for a while in New Zealand, and I've been back in Galapagos for the last 10 years. And in fact, I kind of rediscovered Galapagos through the new technology that photography has been offering. So I still continue to produce books. I'll be doing a new one, not about Galapagos, but about sea turtles of the world in a year or so. It's in the works. So that's me in a nutshell. And I absolutely keep falling in love with this place all over again and again and again, especially after traveling to the far corners of the world, because there are so many fascinating places, and then you come back here again. And even though I thought I knew it, I go, wow. So, yeah.
Yeah, I don't blame you too. I do the same thing, especially flying into Baltra. When you can see the small islands below you, it just, oh, gives me butterflies.
Yeah.
I don't mean to interrupt, but I did just forget that I wanted to let everyone know we'll be doing lots of questions at the end. And so, what we wanted to do so that you don't forget your questions throughout the presentation, if you'd like to just type them into the chat, we'll be going through all of them after the talk by Tui and myself. So feel free at any time if you'd like to write and let us know where you're joining us from. That's also fun. But please, throughout the chat, feel free to go through, or sorry, throughout the talk, please feel free to go into the chat and just type some questions that you might have. Alrighty, so Tui, I'll pass it back to you, ready for the first major question about this tour.
Is this tour just for photographers? The answer is a very sound no, because actually, whether you take pictures with a camera or take pictures with your memory, it boils down to the same thing. The whole idea of the tour is to really get in depth into Galapagos and see as much as you possibly can in a very thorough 2 week itinerary. So I've had people who were sketching, I've had people who were meditating. It doesn't really matter what your objective is. This is a trip in order to immerse yourself in Galapagos and cut yourself off from the noise of civilization. And a lot of people like to do that with a camera. But it can be a big camera, it can be a little camera, it can be your mind, your eyes, your ears, whatever. So that's what this trip is all about. We are going to do, the one thing I can promise you is we're going to wring every last drop out of every moment to be able to see and enjoy these islands.
Yeah, I've got here, speaking of the islands, here we go, our grand itinerary.
That shows you pretty well that we're going to be covering virtually the entire archipelago. And why do we want to cover the entire archipelago? Because most people don't realize that actually, um, even though they're all volcanic and they're all, they're all part of the Galapagos Islands, obviously, they are actually very different. There are different animals, there are different ages, there are different features and different impressions on each one of these islands. So it's really quite different to go from island to island. And I would certainly, well, I will try and explain in a very brief manner what's special about each one of these places.
Sorry about that. Yep. All right. Would you like
So
to start sharing your screen now, Twee, with your
I'll
photos for that?
start sharing
All
my
right. Bear
screen.
with us, everyone. We're
Um,
still practicing going back and forth here to
Let us
share
see if
screen and
this
not
actually works. Is it working? Are you seeing my screen?
not yet. No.
Uh-oh. Okay, share. Yes, right. All right.
There we go.
Now, okay. So that's Baltra Airport. And right here is one of my favorite guides in all of Galapagos. But this is just an image to give you the impression the moment you step off the plane, you will realize that this place is different because there is a Galapagos land iguana sitting right there in the walkway, even before you've got all your luggage together. So I'll just run through some of the itinerary of the,
Mhm. Yeah, just the highlights.
yeah. All
Mhm.
right. So what are we going to be seeing? I'm just very quickly going to give you an impression of how different each one of these islands are. So we're going to start right with one of the most outstanding places because basically the most remarkable places are actually on the outlying locations of the archipelago. So we're going to start our first full day on Genovesa. Genovesa is a sunken volcano, so we sail into this caldera, which looks kind of bleak, but it's actually a phenomenal seabird island, and we land on this little beach, and we are immediately confronted with all this noise and activity and different birds, different things doing different leading their own lives out there. And it's really an overdose of wildness, except they're not wild, they're not shy. There's frigate birds, there's red-footed boobies, there's Nazca boobies. This is a pair feeding each other. And you could say you're almost guaranteed, you are guaranteed to be seeing this. I happen to have chosen all the pictures in this little collection from a trip that I did in July a couple of years ago, just to give you the impression of what it's like on a single trip. That's going to be the same month as our first trip next year. The swallowtail gulls, they're found only in Galapagos. They have quite unusual habits. They're nocturnal, the only gull in the world that is, with huge eyes. And here's one collecting little pebbles to make a nest. Their nest is made of little pebbles that are of different colors than the other pebbles that they nest on. You can see some intimate moments. That's quite normal. And in this case, there's a little chick, or not so little chick, as it were, begging for food. And yes, they do that. The parent has been out fishing. They're, like I said, they're nocturnal. They go out at night to catch food. And then there's a surprise. And every single trip that I've ever done, there's always a surprise, something that I haven't seen before. Look at what is being served up.
Oh, oh my
Isn't that
goodness.
amazing?
I've never
It's
seen that photo of yours, sweet. That's holy
it's
moly.
a huge squid. And, you know, how did this mother bird even swallow this squid
Yeah.
and feed it to its rather large chick? Now, if the chicks are really small, they tend to give them smaller pieces. But, every trip you see something that you go, wow, I didn't know this went on. So move
Yeah.
on. From Genovesa, we'll come back south and we're going to visit a couple of different little islands in the center there, plazas. Beautiful landscape, lots of beautiful seabirds, great place to photograph seabirds in flight off the cliff edge. Again, this is normal. You can expect this.
A
Then we go to
regular Tuesday.
Yep. Um, and there's a land iguana, a different land iguana than you see on any of the other islands in the giant cactus forest. I'm just going to go real quick through here just to give you an impression. Like I say, this is all taken in the same month that we're going next year. Sea lions all over the beach posing for you, and then we move on. We move on to San Cristobal Island. We have several stops there. There are some breathtaking views because scenery in Galapagos is way underrated. People don't look at the scenery, they're too busy looking at the landscape, at the animals. But actually, the scenery is really quite amazing. This beach is green because it's made of olivine crystals. And then you go a little higher and you've got these beautiful scenery with boobies in it. And we're going to be seeing blue-footed boobies at a number of different places, but this is one of them. Then we move on, we go to another real highlight, an outlying island. That's Española Island, which is not only a great seabird island, but it's actually a very old island. It's probably the oldest island in the archipelago, and so it's quite eroded and quite spectacular landscapes. There's a blowhole where the waves break through, but it's the only place where the waved albatrosses nest, and July happens to be when the chicks are recently hatched. They start hatching at the beginning of July. And so it's really cute if you can actually spot one of these chicks. A lot of the time they're underneath their parents, but still, they're the cutest thing in the world. And as well as the chicks, there's a good likelihood of seeing the courtship display. And the courtship display is not just a random dance of movements, etc. It's really choreographed. It's like 1, 2, 3, we do this to the left, to the right, to the, etc., and on and on. And it's mesmerizing to watch. So, real quick.
Oh, but that's great though. Frame by frame, you've really got the dance, the whole choreography really
So,
well
move
well
on to
pictured there.
Floriana, another pretty old island, but not as old. And there's a big saltwater lagoon there. And if we're lucky, which we usually are, there are flamingos in that lagoon. I say if we're lucky because the flamingos move between islands, they fly back and forth. These are the only flamingos anywhere in the Pacific found in Galapagos. They're actually the same flamingos as in Central America and some Caribbean islands, but they're more colorful in their natural situation. So that's pretty exciting. Then we move on to Santa Cruz. That's the central island where there's the largest population. I'm not going to talk about the people. I'm one of them. To be honest, probably too many people in Galapagos right now. But the good news is that the human population only covers 3% of the entire area of the Galapagos Islands. So we're all crowded together. And the interesting thing about Santa Cruz is that we'll go into the highlands. And the highlands are totally different from the coast because the coast is really, really dry and it only rains for a month or two in the year. In the highlands, we have a cloud forest and we have giant tortoises in that wet forest. And they love to wallow in rain ponds. And it's just really lovely to see them in their own environment. There are, excuse me, there are many of the 17 different species of Darwin's finches. This happens to be a carpenter finch, famous for using a tool, but don't expect to see one using a tool because that doesn't happen very often, but it can happen. So, just to show you the variety of places. Then from there, we head to Isabella Island, the big one, and the young one, as well as Fernandina. All these islands have giant shield volcanoes. The highest one is 5,556 feet high. It's the one over there in the distance. But all these shield volcanoes are quite active, and every few years they erupt. I'm not promising an eruption, but last April I had a trip and there was one. So it's a totally different world around the western side of the archipelago, and that's what's so fascinating. We're spending a whole 3 days of the trip around the west. We'll be going to various points on Isabella and Fernandina Island, some different landscapes, obviously very volcanic, all very young, but also this is the heartland of both the Galapagos penguin, the second smallest penguin in the world, as well as the flightless cormorant, which is the biggest cormorant in the world, but it doesn't fly, and all sorts of things. You can see in this picture, there's actually not only blue-footed boobies, but marine iguana, sea lion, a few crabs. So, it's a very varied environment. Fernandina Island is the biggest island in the world that has no influence from humans, no introduced species, no extinguished species, and vast numbers of marine iguanas, amongst other things. So it's a real treat. And we also visit some mangrove inlets, totally different environment where sea turtles come to rest. This is just a shot taken by dipping my camera over the side of the boat, the right camera, that is, the one that can get wet. And so, there's huge amounts of variety. There's even some little sinkholes in the middle of a lava field that have these little oases with a few flamingos in them. So that's 3 days around the West. I could spend 3 weeks around the West. But then we come back to the center of the archipelago, to Santiago Island. And there we also make several stops. Santiago is a medium-aged island. And, this place, for example, is called Puerto Egas. It's considered a kind of a no special place. There's no great colonies of boobies or iguanas or whatever. No, there's just a little bit of everything. And it's magical. You never know exactly what you're going to see. This is sunrise. We land right before the sun even comes up over the island. And then there are little surprises, little lava lizards. There are different species on different islands. A marine iguana basking on the warm rocks with all the Sally Lightfoot crabs. That's the next island over, Rabida, a beautiful place with red beach. We have beaches of different colors. We have golden beaches, white beaches, black beaches, red beaches. all depending on what the material was that was ground up to create these beaches. And I haven't really mentioned the sea lions because we see them in a number of different places, but they are the only sea lions on the equator. They're related to the California sea lions, but they're smaller. And here's a mum with a newborn pup. July is the beginning of the pupping season. And because it's getting hot, she's trying to get the pup to go to the water because it's going to overheat. And so she's dragging it across the rocks, and the pup is complaining to go and dip it into the sea. And of course, then there's the undersea world, which is equally fascinating as the above water, as you can imagine. So basically, virtually every day we'll be snorkeling once, sometimes twice. And the sea lions, again, are the stars of the show. They are playful, they are fast, they are amazing to watch underwater, and an endless source of giggles, fascination, and of course, for the photographers, for some real challenges because they don't stop. They are always on the move. This one's playing with a starfish. There's penguins, there's fish. It just doesn't stop. And to see a marine iguana underwater is amazing. I've seen them a million times and I'm amazed every single time. Sometimes you even see them with a mermaid, but that doesn't happen very often. The same mermaid can swim through a school of fish. So that,
Very nice.
in a nutshell, tells you a little bit about what our itinerary is offering. There's much, much more, but it really shows you the overall feeling of the trip, of going to all these different places that are all totally different, have different things to offer, and the fact that it's never twice the same. So while I'm showing you pictures that were all taken in the month of July, another month of July is going to be different. But in a moment, I'll talk about the different times of year and why I prefer certain times of the year than others.
Yeah.
So
I was
at
gonna
the
say to you, I can bring that up. Perfect timing.
Yeah,
If you'd like, I will start sharing my screen
okay.
instead.
I'll stop sharing mine and you can share yours.
There we go. So what we have, I've got here, just our exactly what Tui said, our various tour dates. So these were specially selected. We worked with Tui on them. So Tui, yeah, if you'd like to talk a little bit about why July and May were the times of year that you thought would be best for this.
Well, basically, we have, roughly speaking, two seasons being on the equator. We're influenced by the currents that come up from the south, as well as the southeast trade winds that also come up from the south. So technically, we're kind of in a southern hemisphere climate pattern. But needless to say, there are wonderful things to see in all month of the year, but there are two general tendencies, and I'll explain to you why my preference is for these dates. From about December to about, because of course it varies from year to year, to
Oh.
about March, sometimes into April, sometimes it starts as early as November, like this year, it starts to get hot. And as it gets hotter, there's less wind, less current, less oceanic upwelling, and gradually the activity drops down. All the wildlife that doesn't migrate, most of them don't, tend to sort of wrap up their yearly activities like breeding, and it gets sunnier, hotter. It's probably nicer for spending time snorkeling because it's warmer. The water is a lot warmer. Remember, we're on the equator, but it can get quite cold in the water. So a wetsuit is generally more than recommended. But the problem with that period, without much currents, is that everything kind of disperses. The seabirds have finished breeding by November or so, and they're molting, they're recovering, they're spreading out. So you don't see quite the density and the height of activity during the warm season, even though in some ways it's more pleasant, especially if you're particularly keen on snorkeling. But even snorkeling, you tend to see less schools of fish because they go deeper down because it's It's warmer near the surface. So come about April is when the cold waters start returning. And gradually it also gets cloudier. So it gets cooler, more pleasant, but less sunny until pretty much the end of the year. This can vary by a month or so, which is why I've done great trips in April, but I'm always nervous about them because sometimes it's too soon and it's still full on hot season. So I
Yep.
tend to just push it a little bit to May. And I also don't go all the way up to November for the wind down period because things tend to start winding down by about September. If the birds have been successful in nesting, they will have finished. The chicks are fledging, so there's not a lot of adults in the colony. The fluffy chicks have grown their brown, usually dull feathers that they have in the first year. So that's why I personally narrow it down to basically May through July. That's really where I feel that everything is at its peak. The water is colder, so you have to prepare for that. But the cold water is what brings everything to life. And there's less sun, which sometimes is a shame when you want a really nice sunrise or sunset, but it's also a lot more pleasant after the first couple of hours of the morning when the sun starts beating down. So, and it also means that if you're a photographer, you can go on photographing even when the sun is higher in the sky because it's behind clouds. If it's a cloudy day, we get mixed. And some years are really sunny, some years are less sunny, but it's less sunny during this period, but there's just a lot more happening. So that's why I personally do all my trips between May and August.
Right. Great. Thanks, Twee. So as of this afternoon, we do still have spaces available on all three departures. So if there is one in particular that you're looking at, feel free to let us know, and we'd be happy to put a complimentary hold for a week while you're deciding. But at this point, fewer spaces in 2026 actually, but yeah, still some available on all of them. At this point, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to very briefly talk about the ship that we're using. And so what we've decided to use for at least the time being is this catamaran called the Anaí. As with all of the ships that we work with and recommend, it's locally owned and operated in Ecuador. You can see it, lovely catamaran. There's a picture of the bow and the stern. Those are water taxis you see in the image. That's not the Zodiac that you'd be using. Don't worry. I just wanted to highlight that briefly. So there we go. These are some of its decks. It actually was recently renovated. And so when I went on board, the last time I went on board was just for a very brief inspection. That was a few years ago now. And so since then, they've done a lovely little renovation of it. So this is outside. It's got an outdoor bar area. This is an example of one of the suites. Suites are on the upper deck, and I will mention all cabins are sold on a first come, first served basis. So there are two suites, or sorry, there's the suites you can see on the upper deck, and then the others are either twin or, because of course Ecuador is a very Catholic country, they call it a matrimonial bed configuration, meaning a twin. So you can choose between the two. I gotta say, this is kind of an odd angle of a photo. It was provided to us by the ship owner themselves, but it kind of gives a wonky impression, I guess, of the cabin, but hopefully just a brief view or a general overview of what it would be like on board in those. Here is some main common areas. This is where you'll be holding your briefings with your guides and Twee each evening, and which she'll speak a little bit about briefly. But just to give you an idea, it's all air conditioned, of course, which you don't really need in July, but it is climate controlled, not to worry. And so, like I said, Twee's going to speak a little bit about what a typical day is like. It's talking about that common area and getting your briefings from your guides. So remind me, Twee, I think you wanted to share your screen at this point with some more
Yeah,
photos.
yeah,
Perfect.
just
Okay, so what I'll
briefly.
do is I'll stop sharing here and I'll leave it to you. Perfect.
Okay, are you seeing my screen?
Just a second, exiting my own PowerPoint. There we are. We're seeing my email though from
Oh,
earlier today.
I would say, I hope I'm not scaring anybody off, but I would say that this is not a trip for somebody who just wants to lounge in a deck chair
Sorry, Tui,
because,
just before you were mentioning you were going to share photos, but right now we see your screen, but we see my email
oh,
on the screen. Yeah, so I
okay.
think it's maybe your desktop that you're showing or that you're seeing on your
Oh,
end. That's
why?
all.
Well, yes, I realize that, but I don't understand why it's not playing because it was playing before.
That's all right. So while you're doing that tweet, I'm going to start answering some questions. We've got some questions in here. So the first one is about rougher seas in July, and if you're prone to seasickness. So I I very unfortunately am extremely prone to not only seasickness but even motion sickness. I was that kid getting sick in the car for any car ride. My old office in Galapagos was incredible, but it looked out to the bay, and even just watching the ships bob on the water sometimes made me feel a bit queasy. So when I say I'm extremely prone to seasickness, I mean extremely prone. But what I tell all guests is you want to go to Galapagos prepared for any type of seasickness. Galapagos is not the place you want to waste feeling that way. And so what I recommend is going with at least Dramamine, if you can, scopolamine patches, the ones that go to the back on the back of your ear. I would say also, I'm not a medical professional by any means, so please speak to your doctor about it. But no matter the time of year that you're going, no matter the ship, I recommend you go prepared for it. And so yes, July is the start of the change in season, so you will get slightly rougher seas than other times of the year. But if there's a full moon, even during the calmest time of the year, you're still going to get rough seas because of the surge in the aguaje. So that's why I say no matter the time of year you go, please just make sure that you're going prepared with something for seasickness because it's almost guaranteed you're going to feel the rock of the sea, sorry, of the sea on the ship. I used to give talks on board the biggest ships in Galapagos, and even on those, I felt queasy. So yes, please go prepared. Um, and now
Remember,
I'll leave it to
Susan,
Twee. Yeah, sorry.
yeah, remember that when you're on a boat and you're living on a boat, you actually get used to the motion. It's when you just get on the first day or two, or maybe three, if you're particularly susceptible, that you are affected by seasickness more readily.
Mm.
Very few people continue to be affected after
I'm
the first
I'm
couple.
I'm one of
You're
those people,
probably one of
Twee.
them.
Yes, I am
Okay,
definitely one of those
sorry.
people. So for my
All right.
entire 8 day navigation,
But
I got to the Bolivar Channel thinking, "Oh, I'm fine. I finally have my sea legs on my first 8 day cruise in Galapagos. I was so excited. I stopped taking Dramamine. And the second we started navigating south towards Floriana, I instantly lost my dinner and did not feel well.
so
So
usually we travel
usually
only
people are
after
fine.
dinner.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
it means you have time to take your Dramamine, get into your bunk, go to sleep, and then
exactly. Yeah.
it gets going.
Exactly.
So it's
And I'm very
usually,
much an extreme case. I will say that. Take what I say with a grain of salt because I am the extreme, but we always just want to make sure you're prepared. That's all.
I've never had a group where they didn't get over it taking Dramamine
Yeah.
after the first couple of days.
Good.
Can you
Yeah, I'm
see my
glad.
screen now?
I can see
Is
your
my
screen,
screen?
but it's all black.
Oh, oh no. I don't understand because I'm doing exactly what I did before and
Oh,
it's not doing the same.
now it's gone back
So
to yeah, your
yeah,
emails.
I will
Hmm.
just put it on this screen and see whether
Yep,
that
there we
works.
go. Now we
Yeah,
can see the window coming in. Yep,
it's
there we
just
go.
not my second screen anymore. Okay, well,
Okay.
so
Well, we can see the photo now with the
yeah,
blue-footed booby, and
and
it's hatchling. It's
and
nestlings.
all the
Sorry.
the stuff as well. Never mind. Okay, so
So we're
so
talking about a
basically
typical day now.
a typical day, right? A typical day is we wake up at first light, and first light on the equator doesn't last long. It's about, well, depends when you want to wake up, that's up to you, but we have breakfast at first light, which is 5:30 in the morning, so that we can actually hit the beach when the sun comes up. And that has two phenomenal advantages. One of them is that it's actually three of them. If the sun is out, if the sky is clear, it's beautiful. It's also the time when all the seabirds and all the wildlife is most active. And it's also the time when almost no other ships take their people ashore. So we have it to ourselves. So that's really a highlight, and it's something to bear in mind. That's why I said, this is not really a trip for couch potatoes. So yeah, we'll be up there as the sun starts to clear the clouds or the mist, and we'll be seeing the best of the best morning light, and usually without anybody else in our way. Now, we will be following little trails that are designed by the national park to keep everybody in line. We don't wander around freely. There are modest little signposts like this one, and marine iguana agreeing with it, showing you which way to go. Are we going to do it like this? No. We are not going in a big mob guided by one person. The rule is that you have to have one guide for every 16 passengers, and you're supposed to stay in a group, and you're supposed to stay on the trail. Well, we're going to respect the rules, but we're not going to do it like this. We're going to do it like this, which means that, yes, we're on the trail. Nobody's breaking the rules. We're staying 6 feet away from the wildlife who happen to have chosen to place themselves in the middle of the trail. And some people are stopping, some people are looking, contemplating, some people are taking pictures. Sometimes we'll be in a group, but we'll just sit around and soak it in because we have time on our side. And that's really what I find absolutely necessary to be able to appreciate Galapagos. You can't just go zip zap back to the bar. It's just not what it's about. So yeah, we'll spend time photographing, watching, observing, and that's when surprises happen. That's when things happen that you never thought would happen, or you just sit there and you pick your favorite subject and you wait for it to do something or whatever, or you let the wildlife come to you. Here's a trail. It's a tourist trail, but the tortoises use it too. So we left them a gap in the middle, and they came along and walked along the trail, and we just let them go by. Or you can have a little private time. You're not like away from the group that we don't know where you are because that's against the rules, but you can have your private time with the wildlife, and that's what it's all about, whether it's for photography or contemplation or whatever. So, getting down low is something I'll be talking about when we're on board, is that it gives you a very different perspective. In this case, I was standing up over the top, but I like the pictures from down low. And in the water is going to be the same thing. The wildlife will come to us. We'll just try and spend as much time as possible to let everything happen. 6 feet is the minimum distance, but we can enjoy the beach. We can enjoy the sea lions. Sometimes they're curious, sometimes they're not. But, it's about enjoying and not feeling pressured by anybody or anything, and discovering little things, little secrets, a sleepy night heron with a drip on his beak, or a marine iguana just ignoring the entire world. That's what it's about, is just letting it soak in. And if you want to skip your siesta at lunchtime, after lunchtime, we usually have time enough for a siesta after lunch, not very long. You might be able to go to the back of the ship and see these wonderful little seabirds, which, by the way, is the smallest seabird in the world, and it's a Galapagos storm petrel. And they tend to come when there's the dishes being washed, because they pick tiny little bits of food that are drifting out of the outwash from the sink. So we will have times when we do boat cruises, Zodiac as they call them, or Panga is the name they use here, where we're not actually stepping ashore, but we're actually cruising around the wildlife. And if you still have any energy left, we also have the opportunity to do kayaking in some places, not everywhere. And then we'll be there right up until sunset. That's the idea. There's no rushing back to the bar. I'm afraid the bar will have to wait. Um, just be there for that glorious moment, which doesn't last long on the equator. We're allowed to be ashore from 6 in the morning to 6 in the evening. We come back for lunch. We go snorkeling most days in the morning and often sometimes in the afternoon as well. And we have lunch. We have a little bit of a downtime unless you're eager to go kayaking or something. So that's about it basically for how a day works out.
Yeah, I would just add to based on questions I usually get. So a few other little non-photography or non-special tour related elements. This happens on all Galapagos cruises. Each evening, you'll be getting a briefing by your naturalist guides, and Tui will be there as well. And what they'll be doing is outlining, or maybe talking about some of the highlights from the day, perhaps sharing some photos. But also, what they'll be doing is speaking about the next day. So, where you'll be navigating throughout the night, where you'll be weighing anchor and waking up, which is part of the incredible part of Galapagos and being on board a ship, is every single morning you're waking up with something new outside your window. So they'll be
That's
talking
very
about the next day. Yeah, and in very, very detailed manner to the point where they'll be helping you with what kind of footwear should you be have with you wearing or have with you. What should you have in your pack? How long can you expect roughly? Again, this is all very estimated, but the time that you'll be out. So will you need extra sunscreen? Probably. Will you need your big water bottle? Yes, most likely, that sort of thing. They'll talk about the different activities. And another point, just throughout the day, you're always going back to the ship in between these activities. So you always have time to change. You always have time to grab your underwater camera and equipment before you go snorkeling. You're never really moved from one hiking activity to a snorkel unless it's an add-on at the beach. And you're never expected to get out of the water and then do a 2 hour walk. You're always going back to the ship using it as a base. And that's the type of thing that your naturalist guide will be going over each evening, specifically for the next day. After dinner, you go to bed. You're probably going to be passed out very
Please
early, I
don't.
promise. And then you'll forget everything and you forget everything the guide says. And you wake up the next morning and at breakfast, you go, oh, right, where are we going again? And what type of shoes? And is it water shoes or hiking shoes? And so don't worry. I am one of those people.
It'll all be written on a blackboard. Um,
Exactly. Yeah.
and I also forgot to say that I will be giving talks for those who wish to stay awake, which is usually not many, but Um, not very long, but it's usually after dinner because there's no other time, unless we happen to have a slow afternoon. Some days are slower than others. Sometimes I can do a talk in the daytime, but I'll be doing various talks on photography, but also on things like the geology of the islands, how the volcanoes work, and how the different species came about. The different talks on different topics, all of them heavily illustrated with pictures. So that's just to make sure that there is no downtime.
Exactly. Alrighty. So speaking of all these day-to-day activities and how much your guides will be preparing you for each activity in each day, I'm going to go back to my sharing of my screen because we're going to chat a little bit about the guides that were all hand chosen. So yeah, Twee, you know them well, you know them best. So please go ahead and feel free to introduce our two guides for these special trips.
Yes, that's absolutely crucial because, frankly, that was even my condition for accepting to do these trips, is
Hmm.
that I find that the person who makes or breaks the trip is not me, it's actually the guides. The guides are licensed by the Galapagos National Park, and they are responsible for everybody to obey the rules and to not, wander off the trail or do things, pull iguanas' tails or whatever. And there are some guides who have been doing it for a long time and who are very rigid and very serious, and they give you long lectures while you're standing in the sun about how whatever a marine iguana evolved. And I'm like, no, we don't need to do that. Let's just go look at the islands. Well, let's get enthusiastic. The guides will give you lots of information, but I have handpicked them because I've worked with them before, especially Monica, who is a dear friend, and the one on the left in the picture here, Monica Reck. Her father is a German biologist, her mother is Ecuadorian, and Cornelia is a Swiss lady who married an Ecuadorian born here in Galapagos. And they work as a wonderful team, and they are so full of enthusiasm as well as knowledge. So they will be sharing that with you, not only in terms of telling you about what's going on, but also their passion. And I think that's equally important. When they see something that they think is unusual, they get so excited about it. But they're also reasonably flexible, so they're not going to herd you like that picture I showed you. They're going to let you wander off a little bit. And if you get a little too far, they're going to say, you know, we need to get a little bit more together. But it's very unusual to have two guides for 15 people. So that gives us
Right.
lots of flexibility to have, you know, the photographers who want to spend the whole afternoon shooting the first booby they see, and those who want to go see what other booby there is around the corner. So we have a guide for each type of desire.
Yeah,
So these two gals is what is really going to make the trip fantastic.
excellent. There we go. So we're nearing towards the end. Tui, I'll let you to wrap up this. This is my favorite part here, actually. Um, and so far there aren't too many or really any more questions in the chat. So um, I'll let Tui, you take your time with this. If anyone has any questions that you'd like to put in there, please feel free. We'll go ahead. We'll wrap. We'll go over the questions at the end. All right,
Okay,
Tui.
well, this is really just a sneak preview of one of the talks that I give at the beginning of the trip, which is about how I look at photography, because, I mean, it is labeled as a photography trip, but as I've explained, it's labeled as anyone who really wants to get to know Galapagos. But with regard to photography, I've been doing it here in these islands now for over 50 years. And I have a certain way I look at it. And basically, the first question is, am I looking at the booby or is the booby looking at me? Obviously, both, but I'm more interested in what the booby is thinking or looking at me for. And I tend to try to portray what I shoot from the perspective of the wild animals. And that's why I think you can show the next picture. I like to say that there's basically as many ways of looking at the world as there are eyes out there looking. And these are all Galapagos eyes, a swallowtail gull, a pelican, a flightless cormorant, and below are two waved albatrosses looking at each other in courtship. And that's what I've had comments from people saying your photography is different because you're not actually treating your subject as a subject. And in a way, I feel that I'm a naturalist first and a photographer second, but I have been photographing all my life. So I try to translate what I see into a picture. But more than anything, I'm interested in portraying how these animals live, how they regard each other, how they look at us. And I think I can share my screen for just the last few pictures that I threw in,
Sure.
just to give a little bit more of an example about that.
Yep, that would be
And
great.
see, now where did my, oh dear, where did my slideshow go? Because I had to move it from the top screen to the bottom screen, and now I can't find it. Oh, there it is.
Uh-oh.
There we go. Got it, I think. So I'm going to share my desktop. It's weird. Can you see it or not? Or do I have to
Not yet, but there's always a delay.
share?
There we go. It's about to share.
Okay. So I was going to go back to the, oops, I went back too far. Okay, can you see it or not?
We can see, yep, it's gone. You've got the
Okay.
marine iguanas and the pelican up
Yeah,
the wall.
I have that picture up last, which is my challenge to myself is not only to show the animals doing what they're doing, but the environment that they're in. And that is a really big challenge because you're actually trying to take two pictures or maybe three into one because you need to get an interesting landscape, an interesting animal, and hopefully some interesting light as well. So it rarely comes together, but that's really a, it's a challenge that you can give yourself in Galapagos because it's it's actually possible to do this. And that's what's so unique is that you can get different angles, you can get down low, you can look at things that will only ever happen once. You know, when did I ever see an iguana and a and a Galapagos penguin greet each other once? And it was on a Galapagos travel trip.
Oh, amazing.
So, you know, there's always these surprises. It's always different. You know, when have I seen a tortoise go and sniff an iguana's tail? And
It
why?
does look
I
like they're
don't know.
playing tag. Mhm.
I don't know to this day why he was doing this, but you know, it's
Oh, that's
just
funny.
these things that happen. So it's more than just a nice portrait. That's what I'm trying to say. I think there are just so many opportunities to do things differently. In this case, there were these beautiful crabs on the rocks, and I thought, wow, that's pretty nice. And I saw this pelican fly. I thought, I wonder if he's going to land here. And sure enough, he did. And so, you know, like I say, it only happens once, and you only get the shot if you're there. And that's why I will never ever get tired of doing these trips because it's just always so full of surprises and so full of wonder. And I'm really looking forward to sharing that with people like-minded who are also interested in really getting under the skin of the natural world, which you can do here in Galapagos and not in very many other places, a few others, but not many. So that's
Yeah.
this trip is all about, really.
Wonderful. Well, yeah, Tui, I fully agree. That's my favorite way of taking in Galapagos is slowly, leisurely, purposefully as well. I used to go to the same beach most days after work. It was right down the little road from the station, and every single day I saw something different, and it was shocking some days. There was one day I saw I believe it was a black tip reef shark, but I was sitting on the beach so I couldn't see. And all of a sudden I saw something swim by quickly, and it was a sea lion, and it was chasing a sea lion. I was just sitting on the beach enjoying the sunset with a few colleagues after work, and it chased
Wait,
it
wait,
all the
wait,
way.
wait.
Yeah.
Was the sea lion chasing the shark or the shark
No, no.
chasing the sea
The
lion?
shark
Was the
chasing the sea lion. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Oh,
Into a
really?
bay
Oh,
area.
because very often it's the other way around.
Yeah, no, we couldn't see the full shark, obviously. At one point, we kept seeing the fin going back and forth. But this was a beach we go to every single day. And it was, you never know what's going to surprise you. So that's kind of the magic of Galapagos, too, is every day is different, no matter if you're in the exact same location or somewhere far flung across the archipelago.
And this
Alrighty,
is
so there are,
my
oh,
Sally. This is come on. Hop. This is my Sally Lightfoot crab, which is my
oh, very,
dog
very sweet.
toy. And he has his own Sally Lightfoot crab. Come
Very
on.
nice.
He just brought it
Very
to me
sweet.
to close up the evening.
Perfect. Well, I was going to say, yeah, there aren't any other questions for the group in the chat. Just a few questions about pricing. So I'm helping with those. But what I will do right now for everyone is I'm putting in the chat just some more information or links to more information. We have everything listed on our Galapagos travel website and our CNH Tours website. It's just for the moment, we have more information about these tours on the CNH Tours website. So that's the only reason I'm providing that one. You can contact us. At the moment, it's just me. All of my colleagues are out and traveling, and so any email address you write to right now, it's going to come to me. But hello, I'm going to put in the chat here. Hello at cnhtours.com is one of them. If you prefer, hello at Galapagos Travel .com. That also comes our way. If you want any other information, lots is on our website, but anything specific, or if you have other questions, if you'd like us to place a hold, more than happy to. Like I said, we still have a few spaces both on July of this year and very few on our May 2026 departure. and a few more on our July 2026 departure. So please don't hesitate to reach out. Let me know if you're interested in any of them. This recording will also be sent out to everyone who registered. And so if you wanted to review it again, or if you're a big fan of Tui's like I am, and you just want to rewatch it at some point or go through her photos again at some point, don't worry, we're going to send that out. And again, thank you so much, Tui, for joining us this evening as well, our special guest, and of course, your tour leader for these. We really appreciate it. And again, anyone that has any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out. Alrighty, we'll stick around for a few more moments in case anyone wants to kind of lag behind and ask. But for anyone else, thank you again for joining us and have a great evening.
Great.
Alrighty.
Yes.
Well,
Likewise.
Chris
It's
says
been
thank you,
a
Twee, in the
pleasure.
chat. I
Elizabeth,
know you're
welcome.
not looking at the chat, so I've got here just Chris saying thank you for the presentation in the chat because I know you're not going to work on it. A lot of thank yous coming in. So Claudia is asking about the prices too. So in the chat, I've put a link to dates, details, and prices. There are two, obviously, rates per year. There are two different options as well. So one is just our regular as a double occupation rate. One is a single rate. And keep in mind, this is to have private accommodations both in Quito, which is where you spend 2 nights before the cruise, and on board the ship itself. That's the ship's single supplement rate. That's not anything really to do with us. So yeah, there are those two options. If there are two people that are willing to share on board, two solos, that's when we can offer the double occupancy rate. But there have to be two confirmed solo travelers that are willing to share. And so again, things that you can contact me about if you have questions or if that's what you're looking for, all on our website. I think what I can do even right now, I can just copy paste. So for 2025, we've got here into the chat. So it's 14,465 per person, again, for the double occupancy, and then a little bit more for the solos. Any other questions? If anyone wants to ask via their microphone or video, feel free as well. We're here. We're very open to making this a very laid back extra little add-on or extra Q&A. So please feel free. And I will what I will do at this point actually is I'm going to stop the recording as well, just so everyone's aware.